Hello, and welcome to the battlefield at Malvern Hill, just outside Richmond, Virginia. My name is Mark Wilcox, and I'm one of the rangers for Richmond National Battlefield Park. November the 19th, for myself, and I'm sure a lot of other students of American history, this has always been a day of profound meaning. It's the anniversary of the Gettysburg Address, the 157th anniversary to be exact. And on that day in 1863, President Abraham Lincoln and thousands of people, upwards of 20,000, had converged on the small Pennsylvania town of Gettysburg to dedicate what was then termed the Soldiers' National Cemetery. This was barely 4 months after the cataclysmic battle that had taken place over 3 days there in early July, a battle that resulted not only in a major Union victory, but one that we now consider to be the turning point of the war. The president was invited by local Gettysburg attorney David Wills. David Wills, whose handsome brick home still stands in the town square of Gettysburg today. The president was asked to come and to deliver a few appropriate remarks for the occasion, and it would be just that. The president's speech was a short one. It's less than 300 words. It would literally take Abraham Lincoln only a moment or two to deliver the Gettysburg Address. But in that speech, Lincoln reminded not only the large crowd there at Gettysburg, but the nation of just what was still at stake, why the Union had to continue the fight to win the war and establish a new birth of freedom for a united country. Abraham Lincoln's words on that day are considered his most meaningful and poignant. And as we reflect back on those words today, those simple, unassuming words, I think it's evident that they were meant for more than just the northern fighting men who went down during the course of those 3 days in July. I think the pride in every man, every soldier who gave his life that this nation might live, is reflected on the men who died on every field of battle of that war. The battle that occurred here at Malvern Hill was fully 1 year before the fight at Gettysburg. This was July the 1st, 1862. This was the last in a week-long series of battles remembered as the 7 Days, part of the larger Peninsula Campaign. That was the brainchild of Union General George B. McClellan. McClellan, who was able to march his Army of the Potomac up the Virginia Peninsula all the way to the gates of Richmond, but where he ultimately would lose his nerve pretty much, believing that his army was outnumbered, they were endangered, the typical script for McClellan. But he orders a withdrawal. They fall back from Richmond, back to the banks of the James River, where the army could be protected by federal gunboats that were out there on the water. In his first foray as commander of the Army of Northern Virginia, Confederate General Robert E. Lee was not just satisfied with driving the Union Army away from the capital city. He wanted to destroy that army, and he very nearly did. But after 6 days of vicious, relentless pounding, vicious, relentless attacks, the Union Army managed to survive. They avoided destruction, although very narrowly at times. Across this narrow plateau where I'm standing on the morning of July 1st, 1862, stood elements of the Union 5th Corps, commanded by Fitzjohn Porter. This was the rear guard of the Union Army. Across this field, they were facing the Army of Northern Virginia with a crest bristling with artillery, nearly 40 pieces of artillery here, all manned by superbly trained federal artillery crews. Now, even though it was part of the Confederates' initial plan, they were never able to bring up an equal number of artillery pieces here. What they did have was the cream of the Confederate Army, Confederate infantry, assault troops, tough as nails, commanded by men like Stonewall Jackson, Chase Whiting, D.H. Hill, Lewis Armstead, and others. It was General Lee's intention to get behind the Union Army, to cut it off and kill it. But problems would plague the Confederate Army on this day. Poor area maps just outside the capital, which is almost unbelievable. Poor communication, vague orders going out to Confederate commanders. The result of all that would be one piecemeal, isolated, disjointed infantry assault after another that would be smashed by the massed federal artillery and infantry fire here on the crest. Added to the mix would be naval gunfire from the gunboats down on the James River about 2 miles away. So again, the Union Army would be able to survive this onslaught, to live to fight another day. They would pull out from their position here at Malvern Hill and go into camp at Harrison's Landing along the James River. The fallen soldiers, north and south, here at Malvern Hill, would be removed and interred elsewhere. But some never were. Some were buried right here on the spot. And their remains lie here in this field to this day. Like this young man, Confederate Private Edwin Jemison of the 2nd Louisiana Infantry Regiment. We talk a lot about this young man here in Richmond. He fought here with his regiment. He made the attack. He fought a battle. And this is where he died. It's believed that he was decapitated by one of those Union naval shells. He was only 17 years old. There's a monument to him back in Milledgeville, Georgia, back where his family moved. But most likely that monument stands vigil over an empty grave. It's believed that Edwin Jemison's remains still lie here on the field at Malvern Hill. The remains of many a brave young man still lie here in this field. Young men who never received a proper burial. Young men who never received a dedication. So those words of strength and dedication that were uttered on November the 19th, 1863 in Gettysburg are for these men as well. For every man who gave the last full measure of devotion. I was first introduced to the words of the Gettysburg Address when I was a child, and they've remained with me ever since. They are every bit as meaningful and poignant today as they were 157 years ago. 157 years. We know how to mark the time. But how do you measure men? How do you measure courage and devotion to duty? In honor of the day, and in honor of the memory of the men who inspired it, I'd like to offer my version of the Gettysburg Address with my own personal inflections. 87 years ago, our fathers brought forth in this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Well, now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We've come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that this nation might live. It's altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate. We cannot consecrate. We cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. And this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom. And that government, of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Powerful words, good words. And we thank you, Mr. President. And thank you for joining me today. I'm Ranger Mark, and for all of us at Richmond National Battlefield Park, we wish you a happy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next time.